Well, good afternoon, everyone. I'm introducing the first of our new recording podcast Zoom streaming lectures of the research seminar series at Brunel's Theater Department 2020 to 2021. And our guest today is a colleague of mine from the Games Design Department, Mariza Dima. And I'm very happy to welcome you here today, Mariza, to your presentation, which is entitled Affective Dramaturgy in Immersive Cultural Heritage. And to give our audience just a very brief introduction to your work, you are a lecturer here at Brunel University and are teaching design, and you specialize in user experience and user interface design for developing engaging interactions, meaningful interactions, particularly using mobile, AR, augmented reality, and haptic technology. So you are at the forefront of, I guess, innovative designers, and you've worked between academic world and creative industries. And I suppose your main background is an interaction designer, but also creative technologists. And your new project in cultural heritage, of course, is intriguing to me. I know you conducted a conference earlier this year, I think it was in April, which had brought to the table a few people from the curating world, people from the museum world, but also from the theater world. And so this is maybe to conclude the introduction, an example of your wider interdisciplinary interests in different fields that could perhaps offer you alternative or other experience design ideas, and that could be part of your discovery of engaging experiences. And of course, as you mentioned the term immersion in your title, this is something that became a bit more prominent recently in theater and in performance studies. So I'm also the term dramaturgy, I think, is a theatrical term, but I maybe refers to narratives in general. So I'll end here and we'll give over to you. We'll go full screen, and please join us in listening to Mariza's talk.
Thank you, Johannes. Thank you, and thank you very much for the invitation. It's great that I'll get to talk about this new concept, which it's kind of under formation as well, so it's really organic at the moment. And I think finding myself in theater is great because this is my new venture now. As a researcher and practitioner over the years, I tend to only do collaborative projects. So I think the last time that I did a project on my own, which was not exactly on my own, even that was the PhD. But still, this was also done with in collaboration with animators, stop motion animators, in co-design processes. Just to say, I don't have slides, so it's going to be a very, it's going to be like more of a discussion, I guess. So what I'm going to say is I'm going to give a little bit about my background and how I ended up in the immersive technology field, as well as in games, how I work normally, and then my kind of through this trajectory going into how I came to do Sutton House Stories, which is this latest project you talked about, and what I'm trying to develop through that one. So I have a bit of a mixed background. I started as an applied mathematician, because I loved computers and I love mathematics. And but soon I was like, I approached computers always. I was computers anyway, the computing anyway field, not from a science background, but from an arts and humanities always. So it was all about how do we use computers as tools for art. But I did have an engineering upbringing, so I was not really an artist. So I went on and did a master in design and digital media and a PhD in human-computer interaction. But I've always been in this field, and probably you don't know it, but this field has the engineering approach or the very statistical approach, like with quantitative research, etc., but also the more qualitative aspect and more the arts and humanities aspect to computing, computer science and engineering. So I've always been on that second one.
You also told me you dance, and I was so amazed when I found this out. What was the dance that you practiced?
I did, and I still do. I've been doing flamenco, the traditional Spanish dance, for many years. But I've also been doing for many years floor contemporary, floor contact improvisation, etc. I'm very interested in movement. And I'm interested also in choreography, and sometimes I have found many parallels in how design works and how choreography, which will take us into a little bit like what I'm doing right now. So throughout this trajectory, through PhDs and postdocs, etc., I've always been interested in how in how we can use what we call immersive technologies. And back, like when I started, it was a very simple VR without the fame that it has acquired the last years. And technologies like haptics that you mentioned, which for those who don't know, is a technology, is a robotic technology which you can use, and it applies force feedback. So it's, imagine the most famous one I could describe is a pen that you can use in the air, and this pen, say if you are, it's connected to a computer and it has like a 3D environment, and you have a cube in this environment, and you see a small like a sphere going to the cube as you move your pen. So the sphere is your pen. And once the sphere touches the virtual cube, you sense force feedback. So it's actually, if you close your eyes, it will be as if you're actually touching a cube that is in the air, but it's not actually there. So I've used this, for example, to create a digital workspace for stop motion animators, for animators who work with their hands. But the goal was not to create something that the stop motion animators could use to work and get rid of the old art or anything like that. It was to study what gets transformed, what gets confused, what is gained, and what is lost when you move from the physical embodied skills to a digital workspace, by using tools that have the capability to allow some of these embodied skills to be transferred in a way. And so while working on this in this kind of plane, I guess, I have always had an interest in heritage, in cultural heritage, and mostly I think it was the connection between the immersive technology like VR or the mobile augmented reality that you can use to relive the past, to see or to hear or to sense something that used to be there and is not anymore. So a year ago, I was lucky to receive funding from the HRC, the Leadership Fellow Scheme, to conduct a project where I would use a new augmented reality technology, also called smart glass technology, because it does look like a pair of glasses that you can wear on your head. And through these glasses, you can see virtual content superimposed in the real world. So it is similar to mobile augmented reality, where you can see the content through your mobile, but you actually have it on a pair of glasses. I think that these glasses does give an opportunity to design a lot of interesting interactions in a space, and particularly in heritage, because you can walk and sense and see and hear things while your hands are not really doing anything. They're not holding a device. You're just wearing a pair of glasses and you move into the space as you are, which I thought was one great advantage of smart glasses as opposed to mobile augmented reality. The other thing is that through the glasses, you also see the real space. So you don't you don't distance yourself from what's a real space like in virtual reality. You don't enter a completely virtual environment where you don't sense who is next to you or in which actual space you are and every time. And with these two main, to start with, main characteristics of the smart glasses, I wanted to do a project to see how can we best design such an experience, which could be learning experience, because we go into a heritage site to learn basically about the history. How can we best design such an experience? And in particularly, I wanted to do it in heritage site, so like historic houses or castles or even ruins, although it's very difficult to do that outside technologically because of the light. Indoor spaces are much better. As opposed to exhibit-led museums. I mean, I know that both heritage sites are called museums as well in some cases, but I made this distinction between what is a museum like the British Museum, where you've got exhibitions and you go into the space and you see all the exhibits, to the actual heritage site, like a historic house, for example, which is where I did the project, which to me are inherently immersive without any technology. Because from the moment you walk in, you have a multi-sensory experience of the place. You have the sometimes objects that are there that either copies or the real objects of the specific era. The floors, the stairs, and me being someone who loves going into these places, I always find fascinating to think that, for example, I'm actually now walking up a stair that has been like used for, I don't know, 5 centuries. Someone else, like 5 centuries ago, actually walked this stair.
A historical staircase. Actually, if you allow me every now and then to come in and we do it more as a conversation, when you earlier spoke about the haptic feedback, and let's say the staircase is also letting you feel something or letting you imagine something, I wanted to, at that point, interrupt you and ask, I'm not so experienced with haptic feedback devices, but haptic, in a sense, has to do with touch, yeah?
Yeah.
The other day, I read a very interesting art historical essay by T.J. Clark on post-impressionist painters. And he mentions a relationship between Pissarro and Cézanne, and quotes Cézanne saying, "Je vois, I see, par touche, through touch." And I think at that point he had started to work with the palette knife, working in the colors and into the texture of the paintings with the knife. So when he says, "I look at the landscape, but I actually touch it," for me, this was a beautiful image. Now, when you then mentioned the smart glasses, I thought, then it takes us more into the ocular realm, right, where you get visual information. So how do those two relate, the other sensations and then this perhaps more visual design?
The the smart glass, of course, the predominant sense is the vision and the sound as well, because they have embedded some small speakers, so you can listen. And in terms of touch, there are a few interesting things you can do with them. So I'm going to talk about like the glass as well, because once you wear the smart glass, you are of course allowed to touch whatever you're allowed to touch in space, like a historic house, for example. So I'm going to talk about two things. The first one is that these glasses can also see your gestures. So if you are approaching, for example, a table that has some letters, virtual letters laid on, physical table, virtual letters, you can move and you can do a pinch movement, for example, and you can grab a letter.
Really?
And bring it close to you, yeah. So you can
The
simulate.
the virtual letter.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah. So you can simulate the touch. Of course, you're not going to feel touch. But I think there's a lot of interesting things in terms of cognition and how the brain works, on how, you know, if not touching actually the letter is important to you at this moment, because you're actually going to manage to take the letter and get close to you, even read it, or, you know, get some more information about the letter, or any other.
It's the gesture. It's a gesture of maybe even like turning a page, picking up something. Ah.
Exactly. Yeah. In a reverse kind of way, you could introduce touch through even maybe technologies that are now being researched. So there is, do you know this, I can't remember how it's called. It is like something that has a lot of pins, and then you can, you know, create some shapes. If you put your hand, it creates a shape because the pins fall onto your hand. So you can create faces, for example. It's like, imagine a lot of pins on it, and the pins, you know, you can press them down. Or so if I put like my palm on it, then my like the shape of my palm stays on this, because the pins where my palm was are lowered. So it
I don't know this, but it sounds like a kind of touchpad, no,
yeah,
that has sensors inside, or like motion capture sensors that can do very fine recognition.
No, it's totally mechanical. It's like this pin that stay up, but if you apply pressure on them, they move up to where, you know, your pressure is. So if you put a form on them, like for example, if you put a ball, and then you take the ball away, there's going to be a bit of a
the mold, okay, where the impression was, okay.
Exactly. I can't remember the name now, but I was thinking that, for example, you could put these over some virtual content, and then once this technology, obviously, you know, existing, can do that. I mean, it's being under research, and you can like it can immediately take the shape of the object. So if you go close to the object and you just touch it, you're going to be able to, you know, feel its form, because these pins will have been like digitally moved so that they form the form of the virtual object. Okay, so if you have a vase, for example, this can be done basically only for things that are more like, I guess, horizontal. You can put this apparatus where the virtual object is, so the viewer doesn't see the apparatus, just sees the virtual object. But then, because it takes the form of the virtual object, if as a viewer I go and touch a little bit, like with my hand, the virtual vase, I will feel the apparatus. But I'm not going to see the apparatus. I'm going to feel it, and what I'm going to feel is that I'm following the form of the
so you're feeling a difference in the shape, and you can imagine that maybe a heavier weight has been on there.
Yeah, so it kind of recreates the feeling of the vase, but without really having a real vase there. So you can take lots of different shapes. There are different ways.
Playing tricks with people's minds.
Sometimes, in these things you have to create, there's an element of magic, so you need to create some illusions, no?
Yeah.
Of how you integrate touch in it, because I think it's obviously quite difficult when you have virtual and real, but then the virtual you cannot touch it.
I always wondered, historically speaking, when they talk about theater technologies, the ancient expression was the Deus Ex Machina. So apparently a stage machine appeared at some moment to bring some resolution to the conflict, and it was referred to as a divine intervention or machine. Yeah. And I was always trying to imagine what this apparatus looked like and whether it had any resemblance to any gods, but carry on. So this is fascinating. And now you mentioned Sutton House and the grant that you received. Can you maybe to our international audience explain what Sutton House stands for?
Yes, sure. So this project was done at a place called Sutton House, which is a Tudor era mansion house in London, in the area of Hackney. It has been preserved, luckily, by some, I think, the acts of activists, like in the 90s. It was not converted into flats, and it stands there for more than 400 years. I think it was built 15. I'm going to get the date wrong, but somewhere there in the beginning of was it 14th century?
No, the Tudors, I would think, is 16th century, so around 1570s, 1580s, or something like that.
Yeah. So this house is a National Trust property. National Trust is the organization that takes care of all historic houses and buildings in Britain. And it was designed, the project was carried out in collaboration with Sutton House, the educational team, and the curators and visitor experience experts. And together with two companies that develop for the smart glasses as well as 3D content, Fracture Reality and Mimosync. And I brought together all of us in a collaborative design process. So it was not, and I don't believe in that going in as a design expert, brought together everyone, because I think each one of these fields has a lot of input to contribute into how to create this experience. So I think originally the idea was that those who come from Sutton House, they would be experts in what the curatorial requirements were and what were the learning objectives of the space. So what did they want to bring out from the house? And also to learn about how do they work with the house. So it was a house that was very much empty of objects. It only had some important wall tiles of that era and floorboards, etc., and some furniture as well. But apart from that, it was quite devoid of any other object. The developers.
So it was not overstuffed and
No.
full of dusty objects.
And it was really interesting because that was mentioned during the design process, as well as the fact that because the house is 400 years old and it has had so many different uses over the years, it is extremely difficult to make this obvious to the visitors. How many different stories and how many different people passed through that house and all the uses that it had over the centuries.
Oh, is it haunted by history? Or like, you know, in East Germany, when the wall came down, we look at this house and we know, oh, this is where the Stasi had their interrogation chambers. This is where the Gestapo had their torture rooms. Yeah. So it's not like that, right? It's more benevolent. Yeah.
No. It's more, it was full of unknown stories mostly, which is what I got, you know. This is, I think, one of the interesting things that through this experience, you have also the opportunity to use or to play with, to work with stories that are from, you know, other people who are unknown to the general public, like they're not like, you know, a king or a queen. or marginalized people, or stories of the community. So you get a sense as well of, you know, this house belonged to a specific neighborhood, and a lot of the things that happened in this house reflected how the whole community and also the people in that specific historical era were, you know, behaving or living. So I got interested in these stories.
Wasn't there also a teaching role of this building? Children were there at one point, right?
Yeah. So at first it was the residence of Sir Ralph Sadler, who was the Secretary of State for King Henry VIII. So he was quite an important figure. He was the one who built the house, and then it had different uses. But for the longest one, it was during the Georgian time. It was a school for girls in Hackney, one of the first ones, I think, for quite a few years. And that was also something that we used in the experience. And then the last bit, which was also for quite a long time, it was a men's institute of the run by the church in the beginning of the was 1900, even a little bit before.
Men, like men, male.
Yeah, yeah. So it was only for men. And went until I think the 1940s. So it was a big, a long time as well. And a lot of the men who were frequenting the institute went on to fight in the First World War.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Fascinating. So almost like when you do a design project of this interdisciplinary nature, you are learning actually about past history and architecture and the use of these facilities.
The most fascinating moment was when the historians we work with, they brought out all the archives, because we wanted to create virtual material that was to a big extent true to its era. So they brought out all the photographs that they had and the objects, and it was very fascinating. And that's another thing which another area where I think that this kind of immersive experience can help in visualizing these vast archives that usually sit on a lot of heritage sites, either museums or actual historic sites.
Can I ask at this point, because now you gave me another inspiration to maybe investigate the notion of the immersive a bit more. In theater and performance, one tends to think that immersion means you bring the audience more inside, and make them participatory or almost co-creators. Now, I wonder in cultural heritage or in design, especially when you have sites like museums where normally you're not meant to go in, how do you understand this immersive experience to work in fragile cultural sites? Is it really done through the technology then?
You mean in sites that the audiences are not allowed in?
No, I mean, even if they can go inside the room, but they are probably not allowed to move the furniture or to do things in a really active way. So they're wearing this device, and then what happens?
So and this is then when the story or the stories play an important role in how this experience unfolds. So once you have outlined the important bits of history that you want to show as a house, the next bit is, how are these becoming a story? How are they communicated to the viewer, and what's the role of the viewer in all of this? So, and this is where I started thinking more in theater perspective, to an extent in dramaturgy as well, because the creating these stories is all what this is about.
Mhm.
So it's about, like, when I talk about this affective storytelling, it's not as simple as like you wear these glasses and then you walk into a room, and what can you do? You can actually go close to a real object and suddenly you have a window popping up saying, okay, this object was of this century, blah blah blah, and it has all this history. But then what you do in that sense, you just repeat what curators have already done pretty well with the labels and
Mhm.
everything else that exists in the house. Like normally, like you have a map of the, you have some of the history, you have the labels, you read as you go around. But what I wanted to create was an experience that was engaging by being emotionally engaging. So in that sense, there's I started borrowing some tools from theater. And through a lot of iterations, so we did, like, something that I didn't mention at the beginning, is that we did 2 big workshops with the technologists and the Saturn House staff, where we first learn about the education requirements, and then went on to design the stories. And if only I could just like outline whatever was discussed in these workshops, because there were all these beautiful ideas about how to do, and also these challenges. Okay, and that's important to bring. We have to bring both those who work with technology and those who are on the heritage side, because some ideas might not be feasible or might not work well when you go into implementing them. So, but for example, there were questions about what are we going to do with narration? Is there going to be narration? Who's going to be narrating things? Are we going to have one person, or are we going to have different people from across the house's history? What's the timeline going to be? So originally we had like three people from 3 different eras, starting from Ralph Sadler, who built the house, going up to a soldier who frequented the Men's Institute. And then someone said, but what if we just reverse the timeline? What if we start from what's more recent for the visitors as well, which is the Second War, like the First World War and all the atrocities, and then going back. And this worked quite well because it started from the more recent and it went back. And then it was, how do we finish? I was from the beginning thinking there has to be a unifying narrative. There has to be a unifying narrative. We can't just like leave things, okay, here is this guy, then here is the headmistress, and here is the man who built the house. And then that's it, which could be like impressive on its own, obviously. But there's something that has to be, always in the design process, like the last bit that actually ties everything together. And for me, I found it towards the very end, which was being inspired by the fact that the house almost became flat at some point in the 90s. I had like the Sir Ralph Sadler, who built the house, asking the viewer to look out of the window, and out of the window there was this beautiful watercolorish representation of how Hackney was at that time, which was all fields and greenery, etc. And he was saying that a lot of things have changed over the years, but my house and its stories are still here. Will you share them so they're not forgotten? So in a sense, you're kind of closing this whole experience by reminding the visitor why they are there, in a sense.
Oh, that's beautiful. And for a moment, I was just holding my breath when you said you look out of the window and you see a vista from the old times.
So it's a virtual vista. So it's the actual window.
Yeah.
But once you turn into the window, it opens and you see the vista from the past.
Because that's something that's quite fascinating. When I remember, I think I was talking to friends in Houston, Texas, and I said, I'm standing here on this campus, but what was here 150 years ago and someone said swampland, nothing, yeah. The city has not even been built yet, yeah. And now I'm thinking we've just lived through this surreal year of the pandemic where perhaps we were self-isolating or inside our houses, looking maybe to the outside and hoping we could go out again, yeah. Be out in nature. Oh, this is fascinating. So you brought the historians and the technologists together, and you also mentioned something that's very true for dance technology. I remember when choreographers and dancers would be talking to the software engineers and saying, can I do this? Yeah. And then what happens? And then they had to, first of all, learn what sensors are able to do, you know, or what the camera captures with its angle before you can then adjust your own movement to what the software gives you.
Yeah.
The augmenting of the possibilities.
It is, I think it's a true fusion of skills and having a new tool, which is technology. So because for me, the technology is always, like the digital technology is always a tool. So something that my approach is that the glasses, the smart glasses, and whatever immersive technology I work with, in that specific case, was a storytelling medium. It was not. It was not dictating. It's not like, because you can do this with the smart glasses, like you can put a virtual label. This is what I'm going to do. So I'm always trying to find out ways that to integrate the technology in a way that it's a natural interaction for people. It's not, doesn't replicate some of the things that we can do physically, but augments them and enriches them, if possible, because sometimes it's not possible. So.
Yeah. If I understand it correctly, and please maybe tell our audience, the way I heard you speak about the device, I think you called it Hololens, maybe I'm wrong, but that what appears in front of my glasses is a kind of holography. Is that correct?
Yes. So it's this, all these virtual objects or characters, or you can also have videos and animations playing. They are projected in front of you in a way that is a bit more realistic than with the mobiles. For example, if you are in front of a table and you have like a virtual vase you can see in front of you, if you go around the table, the vase doesn't move. It's as if you're changing a point of view, but the vase stays there. To go back to to the stories and how this was created. So what we decided to do is to have these three characters guiding you through these eras, and at the same time you would see things and listen to background noises or music that's related to what the narrator tells you, and sometimes not. So, for example, there was always a virtual fire in the physical fireplace there. That you can hear it from the fire cracking as well. And if you turn your head to the fireplace, you would see there. So none of the narrators mention actually the fire or anything, but it was there. So if you wanted to, you could look at it. So we added a few of these bits and pieces. There were also some animations to make things more real. So there are, and I'll show you in a minute in the video, you'll see there were some 2D black and white photography cuts from those who were frequenting the Men's Institute. And one is smoking, and there is, although this is a photograph, there is like a smoke coming out of the pipe. Or the Sir Ralph is sitting in his desk and he's writing among a lot of letters, and there is a candle that is there, and it's kind of moving a little bit with some kind of air that comes from somewhere.
Beautiful.
But also something that that you could be interested in as well is at some point you hear lots of like giggling girls who are going back to the school, and the headmistress is trying to teach them a minuet, and you see the dance steps of the minuet. You can sit and watch through this whole sequence. If you want, you can follow it if if you don't, you just sit and watch and you hear her. In all this, again, this is just not narration, and that's the thing. It's important. It's not narration like reading from a script, like with no timbre, you know, in the voice, no. It's acting. Okay, so we actually hired voiceover actors to act the script, and we spend a lot of time writing the script and also directing the voice actors as well, because we wanted to add moments where they were very, it was exactly as if they were next to you, and all they had some kind of humane reaction. So for example, in the bit with the headmistress, she's really trying to teach them and they just can't, and she just goes, I told you 1, 2, 3, and she goes like, oh, something like that, while she's talking to you about other stuff, you know. So
it's an enactment that also takes into its form a kind of natural or realistic dimension.
Yeah.
I'm not obviously not knowledgeable at all about cultural reenactments, but aren't there some festivals or some sites where they restage certain older rituals or performances, but you are doing it with the help of these design technologies? It's fascinating.
Yeah, there are the live performance. It's a fascinating field as well. This one, we deliberately did not use 3D models.
Okay.
Because there is an issue with 3D models in 3D. If they look very real, but not really there, then you go into this place which is called the Uncanny Valley. So they look uncannily real, but actually they're not. And usually this makes people have very adverse reaction.
They become unhappy.
Yeah, it becomes a bit creepy or airy. I don't know. It's like this has proven. It's called the Uncanny Valley. It came from robotics research. Actually, it's many years now that the Uncanny Valley exists as a term about the robots that were like humans and behaving like humans, but not really humans, and you can sense that. So.
Okay.
So we opted to. We only had one character, Sarah Ralph, at the end, who we didn't model as a real character. We gave a very ethereal kind of glass made face, but also you didn't have to speak with him face to face. So he was just sitting writing, and you could go over the shoulder and look at what he was writing or look at him, but you wouldn't really interact very close to him. So these are the things that the technology experts can come in and say that this is what works, this is what doesn't. And I think it is in this, how do you create the stories, or these small bits that create this affective for me storytelling. And I have only explained very few of them, given examples. The Saturn House staff, the heritage staff, who knows very well, the curatorial requirements and what they would like to portray and can advise on the history and also on the archives, etc. And the technology considerations are these three things, without which I don't think you can make a successful affective experience with the smart glass. Maybe I can show you the video.
All right.
So that we have something to look at. So I'm just going to share my screen. By the way, I'm going to start sharing. This is the Hololens view. That's the device. This is a little bit how you can wear it. It's a little bit like heavier than a pair of glasses, but this number 2, the second device, second iteration is much more light and very ergonomic. It's okay. I'm gonna start this.
Secretary of State. I served King Henry VIII, and then later King Edward VI.
Music, please.
In sixths. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
When the Church Institute owned this place, it was a social club. It didn't matter what you did or what your background was.
Things have changed over the years, of course, but my house and its stories are still here.
That's it. I'm going to come back to. So it's a small. It's only a 4 minutes experience anyway. I mean, unless you want to sit and look at something more in detail, which you have the opportunity to do if you want to. Yeah.
Beautiful, beautiful. And I think I'm trying to remember now when you first introduced these ideas at the symposium. I'm not sure whether in the debate with curators and members from the heritage community, whether the issue came up. Let's say I want to visit the Sutton House with all of my friends and we come with 8, 9 people. Do you have so many HoloLenses available, or do we make an appointment and go one after the other, or how do you arrange the flow?
So I did this research in a slightly pioneering way, that I thought that in the future we will have our own glasses to go there. Which we actually will do soon, because there's more and more companies now that are producing such glasses, smaller as well. Maybe not with the capabilities that the HoloLens has, the one that they used, but I think that we're not very far away from this future. I mean, there are glasses you can buy now for less than $500, for example. So yeah, and then as opposed to the VR, which needs some space and people to probably, it's not very easy to have their own going there, because you're in a virtual environment, you have to enter, so you have to have a specific space, etc. With the glasses, you don't have to have that, so you can just go in and wear them and start your journey. In this experience, we had chapters. So people would, you could do the whole experience on one go, or you could just choose specific chapters. So say if I even don't have much time and I want to go to Tell Me Palace, I don't know, a palace in the Tower of London, for example, and I just want to see the White Tower and just go through an experience there, I can just go there specifically and choose this experience and go through it. Otherwise, I mean, we could still have that as audio guides if they become quite cheap. I guess the museums and heritage sites can have some of them on site as well.
Okay, and maybe can you explain whether when I visit with friends and I go through the rooms, how does the device pick up the information? Is it already coming, or is it transmitted while I'm walking through the rooms? How does it activate its program?
When you have chapters, you have virtual pins that you can tap. You can pin, as we have this gesture, because it's not, you can even tap it, and then it starts.
Okay. Oh, so you play it while you walk there.
Yeah.
Okay. But it recognizes what you do or where you look. Because your eyes are.
You can recognize gaze. So these are for the next developments, I guess. So it's one of the things, for example, that they have been thinking based on feedback, because we tested this as well with audience. Is what to do when you want to go somewhere else and do something. So you've started playing something and there's someone talking and things around you, but then you just want to go and look at something else, or you got bored with it. How do you stop it? So it could be like, once your gaze is out, this stops, for example. So there are some solutions, but still think these are going to be like researched together as technology as well is advancing.
Well, this is so impressive, and I'm not sure we'll have maybe 10 more minutes to go where we can maybe raise some questions, or maybe you want to add some things to bring your own research effort at this moment to a conclusion. But as you were just showing us the example in the video of, I heard the actor talk. What if the visitor addresses let's say the person sitting at the desk with a question? They wouldn't be able to answer, right? It's not interactive in that sense, or will it possibly be?
No, it can be, but there's certain challenges, I think, that come with that. So the question is always, do you really need to do it? Do you really need to design this? This is always the question.
Yeah.
Everything when we are designing in these hybrid spaces, physical and digital, is, I think it's more and more for me all about cognition and how do you trick the brain into thinking that something is real, although it might not be, or it is what we call the suspension of disbelief. So that's the goal, in a sense. Of course, everyone knows that this is a virtual thing, as they know when they go into a virtual reality, for example, experience. But because now, because you're not in a virtual room, you're in actually a physical room, and you have some virtual material to work with. I think how you create these opportunities where the visitor kind of is immersed because either of like the emotional engagement, like having an actor talking to him about something in that period and listening to sound. Sound is very important as well in that aspect, or because you can pick up a letter and read it. But also, what other things can you add to make this real? For example, what if I see an old lady playing potatoes on a fireplace, and I go close, and when I go close, she talks to me, and when I go close, she raises her head and looks at me. Just that. She might not I might ask her something and she might not respond, but that's already kind of a level of interaction that feels real.
That's also quite touching. I mean, if you imagine that this is to a certain extent a virtuality, but it comes to life in this way.
And then I'm not sure that we necessarily have to, or the visitors expect that they will actually be talking, that level of interaction. That's also a research subject as well. So.
Well, do you have any concluding thoughts, or do you see this now as your significant research investigation, or do you have other projects that you're working on? Can you actually teach this to your students, or is this really on the research side?
This is more on the research side at the moment, because yet there isn't any games design approach, but I have a lot of things that I want to work with on as an extension that came from that project. Some of which I have already started working on, and I think a little bit of game aspect is also quite an interesting area, because I think there is I think it works much more in terms of theater, because one of the things that we didn't do in this project, but that I've been thinking and creating a methodology to work with that, is how to integrate the viewer in that. So what is your role, for example? Are you trying, and why do you wear this device? How do you integrate the visitor as a person and the device as an object in the story. So maybe the visitor is a time traveler, maybe someone who has been lost in time.
Mhm.
This device might be a specific visor, and once you've got this more gamified element, then you can add more interactions. The problem here is that not everyone likes this, and especially as I think to an extent correctly, in the workshop it was said that the more things you ask the visitors to do, the more complex it gets, the more like the back away a little bit. So imagine if you have like a new technology where they have to learn all these new gestures to interact, and suddenly you also tell them that, you know, you're a time traveler and you wear this visor and then, you know, you can do all of these things with the visor, then there's a certain level of complexity that we need to be very much aware of, you know, in design, and how this all integrates itself in the most unencumbered way, I'd say.
That's interesting because, you know, in the performing arts, when I think about the trend towards immersive installations and getting the audience to come in, some works that I've seen are very aggressive, let's say. They're just letting you play or experience the environment and make your own discoveries. But I have seen some performances that were quite pushy and making people do a lot of things. And I tend to also be someone who would like when you go to a shop and immediately the salesperson is onto you, yeah, and wants you to try this coat. And I usually say, please let me make my own choices, yeah. And it's interesting that we have to expect audiences to respond in different ways. And you know, I remember maybe 15 years ago when I started to work with interactive technologies, we had a young Canadian designer with us who worked for a company as a user experience architect, she called it. So she was doing, I guess, testing, yeah, to learn how the people would engage the technology and how it would affect them. And I think that will be also necessary in your case, right? That you do tests to see how.
Yeah, I mean, because interaction design, which is what I do, is user experience design in a sense.
Yeah.
It's just like, I'm not going to go into the labels because in design we have this this trend that like every year we need to reinvent
Yeah.
the same thing. It's just the same skills with different names. So
Yeah. Oh, good. And any outlook or any conclusion you want to draw here from this work that you have now done?
I think I think for me it's a very fertile ground to play, and I would like to work more with theater techniques as I go. And I've already started a collaboration with our ex-colleague Holly Maples, where we're looking at bringing in live performance as well. So I think there are many different strands, and I would like to learn more about dramaturgy and effect, and how do I design immersive experiences. Although I hate using the word immersive all the time, it's such a saturated word, but immersive experiences from this perspective of arts and humanities. Bringing also the engineering inside, because this is important. Ergonomics are important, usability is important, but the main design drive should come from the humanities for me.
Although, you know, Mariza, if you don't mind me saying, I know that, for example, when we announced this talk, one of my colleagues in social works immediately said, oh, I have to come and listen to this. And I know that she works with patients, with clients who may suffer from stroke or after effects of a stroke or other disabilities. And I have a feeling that what you have shown us today might be of interest in the rehabilitation field, you know.
Yeah, and Hololens is used for that.
Yeah. So I think there is going to be wonderful overlaps in the way also creative, affective expression can be experienced by many, yeah, in different circumstances. So I commend your work, and it's very thrilling. So we're nearly at the end of our time, and I hope you, Mariza, I hope you enjoyed this more colloquial podcast Zoom thing. Yeah,
Very
and
much.
we will publish it on our website. And unfortunately, because we didn't have a live audience, we can't field any questions coming on a chat. But trying to think of another provocative question, but not sure now. I remember there was a conference I attended a few weeks ago in fashion, and the young designers there spoke about digital solutions. And I think what they were addressing is, for example, you have textiles and fibers and this and that has to be created or produced. But then you have people out there working on design for the market, and maybe they don't have access to the textiles. So you send them a virtual file. And I was kind of wondering, can this gap be bridged between the deeply physiological, corporeal experience that we also have in theater when we act, yeah, or a dancer? Can it be taken over into this more technologically driven design in your view? That uses approximations of, let's say, if I'm kinesthetically affected through my weight, through gravity, through going up the staircase, yeah, can the expansion of it through the HoloLens enhance this, or does it not always work in your experience? This notion of augmentation, yeah.
Yeah, I think again is about how do you think about the design of it. Very much the whole project was, well, it was created through a visceral, and I'm not sure if it was kinesthetic, but you know, it was about me going to all these places and thinking, I need to enrich this experience. Either of me touching the walls, I was like touching the walls, you know, in the Tower of London, thinking like, oh my God, this is like, this was touched by other people like years and years and years ago. Or by, you know, by moving around it, and by moving, it's also about who else do you meet. And I've always been thinking, you know, I would have liked to see how people dressed and talked in that era. I imagine myself being in, you know, the Great Chamber or something. So how did interactions took place? And you know, I didn't want to be part of it, like, and participate and talk to them, but I want to see them talking and them walking and how they were dressing, you know, how they were moving. So I think for me, this is very important. And I'm not sure if I have found yet the right design thread to do it, but it's certainly my intention. I think it is possible because I don't think that anything is impossible. So, well, depending on the technology you have obviously available, but to an extent. So I'll keep searching for it. I don't know, maybe you can ask me in a year's time.
All right. Well,
but I guess we can look at movement as well in different ways. You know, it's about, it's for us this physiological personal thing, but it's also how other people move and how they move towards you. Yeah. Which is like as the example with the, you know, the old lady. If you go close and she turns her head, that's movement, isn't it? Which has a meaning.
Yeah. Well, with this image, perhaps we will conclude our session. Mariza Dima, thank you so much for this presentation and launching this potentially new series of podcast Zooms. And thank you. I wish you all the best for your research and your further studies. Yeah. And thank you for joining us today. Yeah.
Thank you for having me, Johannes. It was nice to talk to you.